Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's masterclass, part of the Sign of the Times programme, which was created in partnership with the University of York. This programme is supported by the Screen Industries Growth Network, hence Sign. Welcome back to all of you who've been to our previous shows. This programme is produced by Lara Ratnaraja and Shirley Benson, and it's aimed to develop and support the creative industries, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds in the creative business. My name's Helga Henry. I'm a freelance arts consultant that's worked alongside Hello Culture for many years now. And I too, along with Lara, have worked extensively in developing the next generation of arts producers and leaders, often with an emphasis on, again, promoting talent from these underrepresented backgrounds. And I'm delighted to see so many of our past attendees and previous program participants in the audience tonight. I can see from there's a whole range of people. I think most of you will be too young to remember the great Vanessa Williams song, "Just when you thought it all had passed, we go and save the best till last." And so I'm very excited to be joined by our fourth speaker in this program. Really inspiring way to end our season, and it's Asif Sadiq, who's Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer at Warner Brothers. Hello and welcome. Hi there.
Thank you, Helga.
We'll really be getting into it quite soon, but just a couple of bits of housekeeping before we go. As ever, we are going to have closed captions. We have live captioning rather than relying on the slightly wonky automatic captioning. We've got live captioning from Wendy, and they're available by clicking on the CC button. I always go like here, but I think it might be the other side because of the mirroring effect. But it's at the bottom of the screen. There's an option there to view the full transcript, as well as displaying it scrolling like it does on the news. You will have your opportunity to put your questions to Asif later, so please do put your questions in the chat, and we'll gather them and get through as many of them as we can. I will carry on asking questions based on the number of questions we have. So please don't leave it till the last 5 minutes and then all rush at once, because then we won't get through them all. We're going to have about an hour today, and so please start sending questions through as soon as you like, and we'll make sure we get to them. So we've got lots to cover. It's a very, very exciting role and a really interesting journey for you to get to this point. But so people can get a bit of a sense, Warner Brothers might feel like a bit remote, or maybe people aren't sure because it hasn't got like a platform, its own platform. Well, its own platform called Warner Brothers here in the UK. So we've got a sizzle reel, and actually never has a reel been more aptly named. Going to play a minute of VT so that you can get a sense of really the scope and depth of your role. So let's run that.
There is no place like home. There is no place like home.
This is so amazing.
What is it?
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Are you ready?
I'm ready to fly.
We will do what is hard. We will achieve what is great.
I am a revolutionary.
I believe in hope. I believe in belief.
Can I be like you someday?
You can be anything you want to be.
You know how to get me fired up.
Here's Johnny.
Did anybody else just get goosebumps?
Quite a really, well, a diverse array of stories, from superheroes to historical, fiction, comedy. It really has got everything. Tell us about your current role at Warner Brothers. So what do you oversee?
Thanks, Helga, and hi, everyone. So I, as the title says, look after global diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what does that really mean? So it's not like it's a traditional sort of D&I role. So I don't just look after the internal elements of D&I, which I do have responsibility for, but I also look after our productions, our content, looking at making sure we're telling authentic stories. We have diversity both in front of the camera, behind the camera, and really trying to understand what that means from a global perspective. So it's quite big in that respect, but truly interesting and challenging in the same line.
Mm-hmm. So not a traditional sort of training type role. So in terms of looking after workforce and content, there's three sort of massive areas.
Mm-hmm.
So and sort of coming on from the sizzle reel, looking at content, how do you get involved with content? And in terms of is it influencing in terms of on screen and off screen? What's the content bit of your role?
No, definitely. So the content piece is really about how do we tell stories in a different way? How do we ensure that when we are telling stories, we're not stereotyping, we're telling authentic stories? And hopefully you can see, or a lot of our listeners today can see that, it is changing. It's a journey. I'm not saying we're perfect, because we're not, and we're far from being perfect. But that journey has involved us really looking at the evolution of how do we get writers who are telling a different story and authentically? How do we also ensure that we're not, people are not playing stereotypical roles, and we're trying to really diversify that piece, so that someone who looks like me doesn't end up in the same stereotypical roles that you would imagine I would end up in. And that there's a lot of focus on that piece. And then of course there's the focus on how do our stories resonate with a global audience, because globally things mean different things. There's a lot of content that gets translated into different languages. How do we ensure it's still current? So there's all that work, and our involvement is really in numerous things. So it's from the actual stories and supporting with that, but making sure that we've got programs that support diversity into the pipeline. So we've got writers programs, directors programs, showrunner programs. This is where we get underrepresented talent, equip them, give them the knowledge, the skills, and then give them an opportunity to be placed on one of our productions to bring their unique perspectives, insights, and really help us then diversify our content. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that you talk about not having stereotypes. I remember seeing a program about representation of disabled people on screen, and someone said, wouldn't it be great if just the person who ran the newspaper shop in EastEnders just happened to be a disabled person? Doesn't they just that's just who they are, but they run the newspaper shop. There doesn't have to be a whole storyline about their heroic battle with XYZ, or nobody has to terrorize them because they're disabled. That's their job, and they're just getting along with life, and it is that that normalization, I guess.
Exactly.
But coupled with that need for universality, I think it's two things, isn't it? It's quite a balancing act.
Exactly, and also just ensuring, even with the best of intentions, that we don't end up, creating these stereotypes that have a negative impact. Recently there was a show I was watching. It wasn't one of ours, but it was a show which was about firefighters, and on there they had a female who wore a headscarf, and as she was fighting a fire, her headscarf came off. And all the men came around her to try to save her, protect her, and so on. And I remember reading the comments on social media, and a lot of that community was like, thank you for the representation, but no thank you. We don't all need to be saved. We don't need men to come out and protect us every single time. It was fascinating. Good intention. But it created this, constant. It's the same with when you see a person of color. If you see someone from the Black community on a program, we need to tell a different story. They can't just be the gangsters and people who are struggling and stuff. We need to tell the positive stories, and that's the piece that needs to really change.
There has been some changes in screen representation recently. Bridgerton, and in Warner Brothers, Superman's son is bisexual. The Last of Us, where the lead's a Latino, and actually even in the trailer reel that we just saw, lots of Black and Asian oriented stories. But what would you like to see in the future? Have we gone, you know, you've already talked about not wanting tokenism.
Yeah.
So what would you like to see more of? What's going to work, do you think?
So I think, you know, I mean, you mentioned one of our shows, and maybe that's a great example. So if you look at The Last of Us, Pedro, who plays the lead role, he's not playing a stereotypical role. He's not, you know, in a Narcos movie or playing one of the stereotypical roles that you know someone would assign. And then in the storyline, for anyone who's watched it, you know, there's a gay couple, and it's done very naturally, and that's really positive, right? So where diversity is representative in the storyline on screen, but in a way that it doesn't seem forced. It's done like this is just the way we live. And I think that piece is really powerful, because again, with the best of intents and good ideas, there's a lot of shows even I've seen where I'm like, wow, there's a bit too much, like it feels a bit artificially forced upon you, right? The diversity, and that doesn't help, because then people are like, well, it's a bit too much, you've overdone it, and so on. So we need to get to the point where we're doing it in a natural way, where people can truly feel represented.
Where it's not, well, yes, where it's seamless, where it's not noticeable, actually.
Exactly.
And that there's quite an art to that, really. And again, so allied to that, so we've got, as you sort of mentioned just now, there's some storylines where things are normalized. We've got a comment in that I'll pick up in a moment, but how important is storytelling in that creation of equity?
So important. I think, I mean, storytelling just in anything is, excuse me, I think I've done too much talking today. But no, storyline, I think storytelling is one of the most important things, I think, in anything, right? And I say this to a lot of our staff as well, that even as you're trying to explain something to someone, even if it's a business element or a business project, tell it through a story and people remember. People remember stories. There's power in stories. You know, people relate to things that they see or they hear. So I think the power of storytelling is huge, and we have a responsibility to tell stories in a way that, you know, it really changes the world. And I think, you know, that's huge. That's huge. And that power done and used in the right way, I really do think it can have a huge impact on future generations coming into the industry, but also just the wider sort of communities that we live in.
What's the story you're telling? Is there a story you're telling yourself about the types of audiences that you want to, you know, do you have a kind of story of the type of viewer you have in mind? Is there any like depend and how does that change depending on, you know, which platform you're working on?
Definitely. So I mean, for me, the big thing is, firstly, I don't look at diversity as one element, right? Because I don't think anyone is. No one on this call is one thing. I really view diversity as a sort of intersectionality piece, and there's multiple layers to our authentic identities. You know, even with myself, I am what would be described in the US as a person of color, ethnic minority in the UK, but that's not my only diversity. I've got young kids, trying to be an active dad, huge element of diversity for me. No one speaks to me about it. I'm neurodiverse, no one speaks to me about it because it's not visible. But the truth is, each person's life, during their life, different elements of diversity will be important at different stages, some less important, some more, and it will shift. To me, the thing is, how do we capture that? Because it is about retaining, you know, your audiences throughout their lifespan, you know, from when they're young and they're watching Cartoon Network to, you know, as they go through and start watching, you know, other things that we have. How do we hold on to someone and they feel that they can come on our platform and they've got the diverse content they want, they've got representation of themselves in whatever that might be, whether it's visible, non-visible elements of diversity, and that it's accessible. Our content must be accessible. It must be accessible to individuals in different markets, different countries. And, you know, as many organizations are expanding to other countries, you know, people also want to be seeing an authentic representation of themselves. And what I mean by that is, you know, someone in Africa wants to see someone who's successful from Africa. They want to see that image. Someone in Asia wants to see that. Someone in the Middle East wants to see that. So, you know, this notion that people will buy into our traditional storylines. I think, yes, there's a core group of consumers, but, you know, when you think of other future generations, they want to see true representation of themselves, like a superhero. Where's the African superhero? You know, where's the Asian superhero? And I don't mean just by how they look, but I'm talking about the storyline. You know, the young kids growing up in Africa, what stories did they hear about superheroes, and how do we take that superhero and make it a superhero?
Yeah. That's actually that's been a theme that's come up in a few of these masterclasses actually, and the you know, the storyline of the African one, the latest superhero thing, where based on African tales and African folk legends. And I don't think it's enough anymore to say that people are from different planets. I think, you know, as you say, that the root culture still needs to come through. We'll have proper questions in a moment, but I just wanted to pick up. We've had a comment from Noel Dunn, who runs an apprentice provider, very leading apprentice provider for the creative industries throughout nationally. He's working with a young man with cerebral palsy on their level 7 creative industries production manager apprenticeship. So sorry, I didn't read that very well. Level 7 creative industries production manager apprenticeship, and he's looking to do exactly the same to challenge tropes around disability. So at one point we might see if we can introduce you to one another. You know, but moving on to those moving on to the workforce, off screen, you know, there's as much emphasis now on the conditions of working off screen as it is on, not just within the treatment of people, but also things like intimacy directors, all sorts of things that just used to happen without us really thinking about them before. But how else is that changing, and what practices are coming into place into production? And sorry to stack my questions, which technically you're not supposed to do, but I also wonder how those programs you mentioned at the beginning, how does that all fit in?
Yeah, so I think there's numerous elements, right? So one of the things we do in the US actually is we've got what we call our Black Beauty roster, and that's about having makeup, hairstylists who are from the community to hairstyle and do makeup for, you know, people of color and people from the community. And that's so important because, again, it's not something that we traditionally organizations have thought about, but how do we bring that in? Because there's opportunities beyond just, you know, the on-screen representation. It's also about all these other areas of our work. And it's also then trying to really, like, we're just about to focus on a director's program, right? And how do we run that? And in the UK, actually, we've got something called Black Written Unspoken, where we give 3 people an opportunity to write a short for us, and then we air it on Discovery Plus from an underrepresented community, and that's huge because it's giving them experience, knowledge, and it's those kind of streams that we're really trying to get into. House of the Dragon, we've got 2 people of color shadowing the directors of House of Dragon to give them an opportunity to gain that experience. So it's going beyond the traditional ways of entering into the industry and providing not just skills training, but also the informal elements, because this is one of the things which I personally have a very strong sort of view on, which is you can fix everything from a diversity or equity or inclusion perspective with formal processes, right? You can make a system more equitable. You can do a great recruitment process. The informal elements that, you know, a lot of people from underrepresented backgrounds don't have power over, that's what we need to also focus on. So how do we create equity in that, right? When you don't know someone and you want to work in a production, how do we create access for those individuals? You want to work on one of our productions in the UK and you don't have a driving license. What are we going to do, right? We should then try to support you in getting a driving license, or, you know, getting a hire car or some way of getting there. Because if we don't fix those systems, you can create the most equitable official processes, but access is still not there.
So many things are simple things like, as you say, formally it can be about language, but informally it's going to be about people just having having confidence to see themselves in that position. To, you know, they can go, yes, I know I can write my CV, but really, and whereas I think because so much of the old routes have actually, there's been an informal grease, you know, the wheels have been greased informally through networks, through social capital, through a sort of way we do things around here, and familiarity with that can be just such. It's like asking people to describe the water that they're swimming. You know, like ask a goldfish to describe the water they're swimming in.
Exactly.
People can't see it. So for some people, these changes are seen as almost challenging. It's getting so they can be very vocal. Well, I say vocal, often typed. There can be a lot of
warriors.
Yeah, keyboard warriors. People that you can encounter positional or real opposition.
Yeah.
Is it easier or harder to affect change today, would you say?
I mean, I think where we are currently, there's a lot of society is divided, right? There's this misconception that you have to choose a side, either you're very far left or very far right. And the problem with that is both sides have pulled in opposite directions, and it's like a rubber band being pulled, right? And it's snapping, and that snapping is now causing, this complete opposite of what anyone wants. The truth is, diversity was never about all of us agreeing. The beauty of diversity is that we're going to think differently. We're going to have different views. But how do we collectively bring that together to produce exceptional results and exceptional content? But that requires us to create environments that have psychological safety, that are learning environments. Of course, that doesn't give anyone a ticket to be sexist, homophobic, racist, or anything else. No. But how do we create environments where we can actually have those conversations? We can learn and grow. And I think currently the challenge is, because of that pull in opposite directions, there's misconceptions. And furthermore, when we've talked about diversity initiatives, or and I've worked for a few different organizations over my career, and we've talked about them in isolation sometimes, and that doesn't help, because if we truly believe that this is important, we need to weave it into business as usual. If you look at some of the work we do, you will see diversity, equity, and inclusion being present everywhere. But I've worked in companies where they put all the sort of people of color in a room, and they tell them how great they are, but they never tell anyone else, and then everyone else assumes that they're getting something special, that others are not getting, and it creates these divides and these tensions. So how do we communicate if we're truly dry? And by the way, it's not about, we're not doing tick box exercises, right? It's not a one and done, or we need one of this or we need one of that. No, we still hire the best people. That's never going to change. But we know our systems, processes haven't created equity or fairness in catching the most diverse group of people. So we need to cast our net further, do more work, and really build that diversity in. And also, no one wants to just for anyone's, if anyone's even thinking it, no one wants to be anyone's token hire. I don't want to be anyone's token hire. I would like to get a job based on my qualification, but I want to be, recognize that my skills, my experiences might be slightly different to what others might have, and that's important to me.
But I think, and picking up on what you say, sometimes that's also about expanding the notion of what talent is and how it manifests. Lara and I, a little while back, did some work for an organization in the museum sector, where somebody who was a museum assistant who largely looked after the shop and sometimes sat in exhibitions, apologized to us because she didn't have a master's. It's like, but it was I'm sure it was quite skilled. Don't want to decry the role, but it wasn't master's level skilled. And yet everything is this sort of grade inflation that's happened in various places.
And just on that, Helga, actually, it's also how do we view even qualifications and things like that? And for example, let's take someone who's got a 2-1, who has come from an affluent background, got a 2-1 from a good university, and then you've got someone who's come from a underrepresented background, who's worked 2 jobs, looked after the elderly mother, and has got a 2-2.
Yeah.
Are they the same? I would think the 2-2 is probably a bit better because they've got work experience, they've done other skills and everything. But on paper, we will dismiss the 2-2 and the 2-1 comes through. So how do we create more fairness in it's not the same journey for each person to get the same qualification?
An appreciation of context is absolutely key, isn't it? And yet there are places, possibly not now, but there were places that would just bin everything, like we'll only look at you if, X grade and above. We are going to, I'm keen to get to your career, and we will get to that because actually there's a key part of your career, I think, about being able to hold difference, hold those conversations about difference. But would you say that we are getting more polarized? I think there are some, and of course there are some political leaders, quite a few of them actually, who are playing on that polarization in order to reinforce their positions. I mean, that's obviously there's some extreme examples overseas, should we say? But there's plenty here too that may be carrying out in a more subtle way. So it's harder to have those conversations. What would you say are the difficulties and pitfalls of, say, D&I education in that context?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with D&I education is, and I've done a TED talk on this as well, but I think one of the biggest challenges is that how is education placed within a workplace, right? If you look at traditional D&I learning, very much it's been a, hey, here's a woman, here's someone who's Black, here's someone who's gay, and like we just parade them and say that's what it is. And that doesn't help, because that's not true. We're individuals, we're people. Like, we need to create systems, processes that drive education and conversation, not saying that every time you see someone who looks like that, that's what their needs are, or all of that group, they come from underrepresented backgrounds, or whatever it is. So we need to break that piece. I think the other thing around training and in D&I is we need to naturally weave it into what we do. And one of my other sort of big bugbears is that education generally is very much single-sided, right? And I did a bachelor's many years ago, without telling you which year because it'll give away my age, but many years ago, I did a degree in management and human resource management. Every case study I read about success and all those kind of things was always someone who didn't look like me. Every project, every business we spoke about. And when I graduated, that had a huge impact on what I believed I could become, right? Because it was very much and I still remember the careers advisor saying, you can join the council or you can do this, right? And that was it. But that was the limitations, because I'd never seen someone who looked like me do anything else. Today, I look at the top 10 richest people in the UK, and I think 5 of them look like me. And that's a huge change, right? But why were those stories never told? Because they were rich then, and they were successful then. So the whole education system, in my mind, needs to look at this, even when you think about history. So my kids are learning history today, and they'll learn about the British Empire. And this is not to criticize the British Empire before people think I want to criticize them. But when you hear about the British Empire, which version do you get? You get our version, right, from the UK. Do you ever get the version of the people who were colonized, the people who were unfortunately on the other side of this? And I think again, it's important for people to have context and know the different stories, so that we can make more calculated assessments and understanding. So when someone says that I've been treated unfairly, you're like, well, you can't be. We've always done good to your people. No, look at the history, and there's a lot of stuff there.
Well, also because the history of the colonized is also nuanced. There were some, I don't want to say there were some good things, because they brought the post office and the railways, but but actually on both sides, there were, it's not that binary,
No, but the education piece around that is important. So we learn from a young age that actually there can be, different things, and good and bad and all that, but we don't give that picture.
It's just come through on the comments back to our question about degrees. Kellogg's UK have ditched degree requirements for most jobs as a drive to be a more inclusive employer. Chris Silcock, Kellogg UK's managing director, said, at Kellogg, we believe everyone should have a place at the table, and by ditching the need to have a degree, we hope more people from different backgrounds will consider Kellogg as somewhere for their careers, not just those who went to university.
But I would also add, I mean that's one element, it's great, and there's a lot of companies who have taken away the degree requirements. But then the second question is, even in interviews, why are we still asking questions around, tell me a time when you've done this? We should ask future tense questions, right? So around, what would you do in this situation, or how would you manage this?
That's
because those are better predictors of future success then the questions that everyone memorizes an answer for, right? Tell me a time when you dealt with something difficult. Of course I will. I wrote it down like last week and memorized it. But if you ask someone, what would you do in this situation? Or what would you do there? Better predictor, but also from a diversity perspective, where some people from underrepresented backgrounds might not have all the work experience, all the great examples, you're putting them in a better position to be able to answer those questions.
Yeah. And also some of the things we've been looking at more task-based. So here's a list of emails in your inbox. Who do you get back to first and why?
Exactly.
Not because there's the right order, but going, I'd ring them because it might be important, and I want to know early that you know, just that you understand people's thought patterns rather than their they're parroted, as you say, they're parroted responses. I'm conscious. So we could maybe bring this in, because in turning to your career, you really haven't shied away from different industries and difficult spaces. So and some of the kind of really the police force, Adidas, the Telegraph Group. Was that a conscious decision for you to sort of go, right, I've done this, now I'm going to do this, and it's almost the complete opposite? Or is it just how things panned out? How was that?
Yeah, a bit of both. You know, I joined the police when I graduated, largely because I had bad experiences, and at the time I remember thinking to myself that, you know, if you want to see change in an organization, you've got to be part of that organization to drive the change. Right. And you know, I policing was great, had its ups and downs and so on, but I remember thinking to myself when I joined EY, I actually left policing and went to Ernst & Young. I remember first, you know, having, of course, the panic attacks that everyone has, imposter syndrome, all that kind of stuff. But then saying to myself that I have to continuously challenge myself. And what I've learned after, you know, moving in so many different industries, that as long as you're passionate about one thing, which I was and am about, you know, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, I can apply that passion in different industries, you know, different organizations.
So
and by moving, that's been the
golden thread.
Exactly. But by moving, I continuously allow myself to be challenged, to reinvent myself, and to bring a new perspective. Because imagine if I just stayed in one organization and went to another one which did the same thing. I'd have the same ideas, the same thinking. But because I've jumped, like when I went Adidas, I went from, you know, the Telegraph, and it was like, wow, it was different. And when I was giving them ideas, they're like, oh, never heard of those ideas, or that kind of thing. So I think it's been really useful. It's been great. And it's challenged that, again, the norm of that, you know, you must stick in one career for 15, 20 years. No. Yeah.
So I'm going to go to the Telegraph because I'm really intrigued. And it made me think, you know, it's made me think, you know, prepping for this, when I it's fairly fair to say that the Telegraph is a centre to right-leaning publication. It particularly doesn't like Meghan Markle, let's say, but you know, it's got a view. And I suddenly thought, oh, I wonder what it would be like to work there if you are, because often people in the media are traditionally more left-leaning, or you know. And actually I thought, oh well, and I suddenly thought, well, I don't know if I'd like to work there. And I thought, oh my, I'm just doing what I'm accused right-wing people of doing, which is being stuck in their own views, stuck in their own, you know, and seeking, and even in my media reading, I'm like seeking the confirmation bias of my own views. So I don't want to pry into your politics, but how did you deal with difference there? How did you?
It was tough, and also, you know, the fact that, and you probably know this, press independence means you can't tell anyone what to write, right? They will write what they want. But I learned that you can still influence people. You can give them experiences that give them a different perspective. You can give them insights that give a different perspective. And that was, you know, it was a great, like, I couldn't do D&I training for them and tell them you must do this, because they were not going to listen. But giving them different experiences, different perspectives, challenging some of their biases, hopefully change certain things, right? In certain ways they told stories. But it was hard because you read stuff and you're like, that's not me, or that's not what I stand for. But again, if you can influence that, the Telegraph has a huge readership. And, you know, if you can impact that change, imagine if you can impact Middle England, you know, that age group, it's huge. Even if it's slightly, it's starting to change the narrative. It's the same like the power of media more generally. The smallest changes could make a big difference in that sort of in someone's life. So I guess that was one of the big things. But on the flip side, you know, I make it generally, just in my own life as well, I make it a habit of trying, like, you know, people ask me, what do I read? And of course I read The Guardian, but I also read the Telegraph, I read the Daily Mail. And they're like, you read the Daily Mail? I'm like, because I need to understand how others think if I'm going to be able to challenge some of those perspectives and views.
Yeah, Lara says that actually a lot. She'll read a lot of media that I won't. Because I find it too upsetting. I just remind everybody we'll be moving to questions quite soon. Please, please do send your questions through to the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to them. I guess just one actually. So within those various contexts you've worked in, there must have been times that things didn't go the way you wanted, or that you had some sort of failures, I guess, or certainly challenges. How have you coped with those and overcome them?
Yeah, so I mean, I have so many failures, it's unbelievable. And you know, if I was to put them on my LinkedIn, I think I need a whole server just to hold them. So there's a lot of failures. The challenge is, especially in this work, is not letting your failures be a direct attack to you, or to feel like what you're trying to champion is being stopped. Which is, you know, it's very hard, because people are, you know, real activists, really passionate about these topics. I've learned over time that as I pitch this stuff, as I pitch some of the work in this area, I do it from a perspective that put it as a business case, right? So I don't personally attach to it, because that allows me, when it's rejected or pushed back, I can go away and say, oh, great, okay, no problem. Let me build it this way. Let me build it that way, and bring it back. So that's been a huge help. The other thing is also this notion of, I've learned to celebrate my failures, my shortcomings, my difference. And I say that, you know, in the sense that I didn't do it much of my career. I spent the majority of my career trying to fit in and, you know, code switch and learn about what others want to hear and things like that. And then I realized it's too hard, because I spent the majority of my life trying to be someone I'm not, and it took away from the real strengths that I actually had. And now I celebrate that and I embrace it. And that piece of embracing that means that I'm not worried, right? Even failure to me is not a worry, because I'm like, I don't know how to do that, or I did that really badly, and I'll learn. But again, I put some of it down, again, not to blame any group over another group, but I grew up in a society, in a culture where failure was like the end of the world, right? Like if you failed, it was a negative thing. But I've learned that society doesn't necessarily always view failure. Leaders, majority of the leaders have failed so much, but it's like they're winning when they're failing. And I'm like, I must be doing something wrong. Like when I fail, it's failing, right? I'm not winning. So I'm changing that narrative for myself, so that when other people see it, my failure is a success. Yeah,
I think that's a really, and also sometimes the only person who knows it's a failure is us. It's not meeting some imaginary, and it's not hitting some imaginary standard we've hit, and actually it's perfectly fine. So I think that's a really good thing. I've got some questions in reserve, but I'm also keeping an eye out, because we've got about 10-15 minutes. I think, and actually I can, and yes, I do recommend Asif's TEDx talk from Croydon. If you want to find that, we might even have we've probably got a link to share with you at some point. But one of the things that we find sometimes is that people now are saying, well, I don't know how to say the right thing about diversity. I don't know what they like to be called. I don't know what the right word is anymore. So I'll just, do you know what? I'll just say nothing. I'll say, you know, and people shut down, or only, as it were, confide in like-minded people. So what can we do to kind of overcome some of that? You mentioned a safe space earlier, but even that's been kind of, that's a phrase that's now almost done to death, isn't it? As if you could make one just by declaring it so. Tell us this is a safe space. how can we inculcate or encourage that discussion?
Yeah, I think firstly, we need to normalize making mistakes and getting it wrong. That's the first thing. I don't think there's enough.
Yeah, relates back to your
normalization of
last
it.
point, doesn't it? Yeah.
So that needs to be a huge thing. The other thing is, how do we measure intent and impact? And what I mean by that is, and I'm a big believer, if your intent is positive, if the impact is negative, we can work around that. It's where your intent and impact are both negative, then we've got a bit of a problem, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's about creating that safe space. But also, I think it's for the individual, and this is, and people will argue with this in another way, or will have a different view. But I do believe that it's important that when people ask some of those questions or get it wrong, we call them in rather than call them out. And there was something I shared on LinkedIn the other day around Harvard did a guide around calling in and calling out. It's quite good.
Cool.
And it's the importance of calling in. I do that. So when someone, asked, like I got asked the other day, someone was like, someone said to me that, it's amazing to see everything you've achieved, despite all odds. And I was like, all odds. I'm like, oh, thank you. I'm like, what do you mean though? It's like, it must have been so difficult for you growing up, parents working in the factories in the 50s and 60s, not having access to opportunities. And I was like, actually, I'm from East Africa. I'm from Kenya. I privately educated and had a really good upbringing. But it was like they didn't mean any negative impact, right? The intent was not bad. But what I explained to them is, unfortunately, I'm very privileged. I am, and that's why But I'm like, by you saying or using those words, what it does is it makes me feel like I should be grateful to be where I am, or I should be, very lucky. I'm like, I'm none of those things. I acknowledge my privilege, and I understand there's others who look like me who don't have the same privileges, and I want to support them. I want to help them. But so my point being that I could have taken that as an opportunity to just call them out and
that's right. Yeah, we're all the same to you, aren't we?
Exactly. Yeah. But instead, I was like, let me educate, because the next time they come across someone who looks like me, they're like, oh, okay, maybe he's different, or maybe he has a different lived experience. And that education piece, I think, is important. The difficulty, though, is when you're the victim of this very often, it does become hard, right? Like you find yourself sometimes responding in ways that might come across as being unreasonable to someone, but to you, it's not unreasonable. And I'll give you an example. Like, very, very recently, I was dropping a friend off in West London, and I got stopped by the police, and 3 police cars boxed me in. And they came out and they're like, whose car is this? And I'm like, well, it's mine. And they're like, how do you afford that then? And I'm like, just do the checks you need to do, and let's carry on with this, right? Yeah. And there was all these questions. And to be honest, I was quite abrupt. I was quite rude from the beginning. But that's because that's not the first time I've experienced that. It happens very often. So it might be they see things in a different way. But for me, it's like, I just can't. I don't have the patience anymore to be nice. And I give that example because you might go to someone and very innocently ask, I'd love to know a bit more, about your culture, and they just sort of attack you back. But you have to be, if you acknowledge that maybe there's some lived experience there, there's some trauma and all that kind of stuff. Then then you can approach it differently.
Different people have their points.
Exactly.
I'm mixed race, and I don't look very mixed race. So when people talk about my cut, oh, you've been away, oh, haven't you got a lovely color? It's just like, I know they really mean like, you look well, Helga, but for some, I just get completely needled. I get completely needled by it. It's very odd. Possibly a therapist would say it's something about my own shadow acceptance of my, but anyway. But it's just, and so, I have to remember that people, as you say, they don't have a negative intent. They just wanted to be nice. They think having a tan is good.
Exactly.
Anyway, anyway, don't stop. Sorry. But you just have to remember that, don't you? It's like, and yet someone else, in fact, a black friend of mine, she came back and said, oh, I've been on holiday. Look at me, I've gone so much darker. And it was like, it's fine for her. It's not a thing for her.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got a question here from Leanne Dawson. We've seen so many changes in Hollywood in recent times. more global majority actors, a broader range of representation like disability, LGBTQ+, etc., although we still have a long way to go. What do you think we might see in terms of representation in the mainstream cinema in 10 or 20 years' time that people might not even imagine now?
I think a lot of it would be, and it's a great question. I think it would be those stories that are not stereotypical, like when I was talking about superheroes. We're doing a lot of work in trying to get those stories where, from Africa, Asia, that kind of thing. We'll also see representation in a way that it will be natural. It won't be, it won't be that thing of it feels forced or, people perceive it in a certain way. And we'll also even see acceptance is my hope anyway for the future, because when you think about the whole situation recently with the mermaid, and that's a fictional character. It really irritated me, by the way, because I was like, people were upset that why do we have Black Mermaid? It's a fictional character, so what determines it's white? Like, there's nothing. It's it's fictional.
The original drawings.
Exactly. So I would like to see more stuff like that, which is just, there's no challenge. And I do think, in all honesty, that will happen, because as I said, my kids, they don't see color, they don't see disability, they don't see any of that stuff. So they will expect it. But hopefully for them, it will be things people see. So that I think is, in the future, will be huge. And also, when we think about success, when we think about accomplishment, when we think about, stories, it won't just be the Western world telling them. It will be other places telling stories, right? Every time you see a war movie, it's not only the US winning or the British winning. You'd see the other side of it. Because there is a story on that side as well.
Well, the one thing about having more platforms and more lenses, more platforms is you can have more lenses and more places to show them.
Exactly.
I was on holiday during half term in France, and somebody was on a train and they downloaded something from Netflix, and I could tell they had their headphones in, but I could tell it was the Korean program about the lawyer with autism, the female lawyer with autism. And I was suddenly like, this was just like mind blowing to me. Here we are on a train in France where a commuter is watching a show from Korea where the main character has autism and is a female with autism. I was like, and none of that, it was just, all of it was just so mind-blowing to me.
Completely.
That it had completely just crossed cultures.
But even if you think about, just as you were saying that, the fascinating reach of culture and movie and the power of content, like the fact like Bollywood is viewed in Africa, the fact that Turkish movies are so intense that the world wants to watch them now. I mean, I can't. The intensity of it just gives me panic attacks, right? But they've not adapted. They're doing what they do, and it's now globally being viewed.
Well, Squid Game. There's a Turkish there's kind of a Turkish Game of Thrones as well, isn't it? That people
I know which one you mean, actually.
I can't remember the name of it now, but it's got this absolute cult following, and it is as rumbustious and as bloodthirsty as anything that Game of Thrones has managed. Another question, we've got a couple more. How do we think we can support more talented working class people into opportunities from diverse backgrounds, experiences and abilities? Education, it says, is the easy route for those who've been given that opportunity. Look at our awful Tory government. Lots of representation, but absolutely no understanding of the experiences of working class young people of all colours, races, experiences and abilities. So there's representation, you might say, in our political office, but we've still got this need to support talented working class people of a variety of backgrounds. What's next? What do you think we can do?
I think the biggest thing is, and it's not just in our industry, it's in any industry, right? Every industry showcases diversity, but not that diversity of the socioeconomic background and so on. It's just not there. You don't have that that diversity built in, largely because systems processes are limiting. And this is where there's a duty which companies have to create more equity within what they do. You know, I still remember when I worked at the Telegraph, interestingly, we were doing work experience, and there was a lot of privileged individuals who applied and got it. And a lot of people, we really tried hard to reach people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, from, you know, some of the more sort of lower socioeconomic areas in London. And many of them turned down the opportunity. So I was like, I'm not having that. I'm going to call them up and ask them why. And a lot of them said that, you know, we can't afford to do this work experience for free. We have to work at McDonald's or Burger King and that kind of thing to get them through. So they wanted the opportunity, but they didn't have the privilege to turn it like to some of them didn't even know how they're going to stay in London if they took it on board. Yeah. So this goes back to the point I was making, that we need to create more systems of fairness through that. Also access. We used to get emails, again, we used to have a lifestyles magazine at the Telegraph. If you wanted work experience there, you just had to email the editor. How many people from other backgrounds know that? They don't. But if you know someone who knows someone, they'll tell you, oh, just email so-and-so, and that's fine. Yeah. And that's the challenge. So I think there's that piece. There's also challenges around what is good and the biases we have, right? I read a report the other day that the first 7 words you speak in interview, they determine whether you're going to get the job or not based on your accent, right? First 7 words. So basically, a lot of these challenges are there. And like, really and truly, how many people will employ people with different accents, you know, and things? So we need to challenge all those biases and systems that are being created if we're truly going to start, you know, creating more fairness and equity within our workplaces.
Yeah, that's really true. A final question from me, because I think there'll be people from a variety of backgrounds here, but one thing I have heard you speak about really well is that what's the most important thing that people can do to create better environments for either personally or in their place of work, and in particular how, regardless of our backgrounds, and as you say, we're more than one thing, but how can we display our allyship? Completely,
really good question. I think, look, allyship starts, of course, with you know, turning up first, right? Whether it's Black History Month, Pride Month, that's the beginning of allyship. However, true allyship is about being a voice for that very brave group that you want to be an ally to when they're not in the room. So how do you use your privilege? Because we're all privileged in where we work, the teams we're in, and so on. How are you a voice for that group when they're not in the room? And when they're in the room, how do you ensure you don't take the mic off them, right? You pass the mic to them. So be an ally, stand up for them, but then hand it over to them and let them have their moment. Let them have their, you know, 5 minutes of standing up for what they believe in. That's the first step. The second piece is, I think beyond allyship, it's how do we use our privilege for good? I don't want anyone to, you know, apologize for their privilege, because it gets a lot of people worked up. The moment you start mentioning privilege, people are, well, I've worked really hard, or I didn't have this, or I didn't have that. But there are privileges that you're just, you know, you're born with, and others that you're not born with. That doesn't mean someone needs to apologize, but we need to acknowledge that there's those around us who don't have the same privileges. And how do we create equity for them? And I'll give you a very, very quick example, because I know we're almost at time, but I'm very privileged, you know, Helga, like really privileged, in a very nice part of England, have a very good life. However, there's certain privileges I don't have. When I travel to certain countries, I'm sent to the special queue. I'm asked additional questions, which are usually around the same topics, which is, do I know terrorists? Have I ever been involved in terrorism? And so on. I'm used to it. It's no one's fault, but I expect people to understand that my journey to certain countries involves those unfortunate experiences. Now, my kids, who are as English as they get, right, as English, they will turn 18 one day or 17, and they'll travel to some of these countries. And you know which queue they're going to be sent to? The special queue. That is a privilege they will never have. So understanding that is important. And the final point is, I don't think if anyone ever thought it's good enough for us to sit back and say, you know, I'm not racist, or I'm not sexist, or, you know, it's not my issue. I don't think that's enough. We need to be actively anti-racist, actively anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, and so on, because we have a duty. And the difference you can make in someone, and I'm not saying we need to fight with anyone, right? But standing up for injustice, inequality, when you see it, is so important. It can make the biggest difference in someone's life if someone stands up for what is right. And that's the allyship. that people
Yeah,
want.
yeah.
Standing up
Yeah.
when you see wrong.
Brilliant. That's a fantastic thing to end on. We are very, very closely out of time. We've had some comments on the side. So write about enabling people with working class background, says Amy. As someone who's a working class background who now has some privilege, it's about a whole systems approach. As Leanne said, being an active bystander and speaking up is important. And I think, as you say, looking at the systems and processes like the bits of paper, but also looking at the context, looking at the bits in between and the invisible bits before the people hit the paper. It's been a fantastic privilege to talk to you today, and thank you so much for your time.
No problem. No problem.
We are out of time, so this is the end of our season, our 4 sessions. So I'd like to extend a big thank you to our program curator Lara Ratnaraja and our producer Shirley Benson. You'll have seen them in the comments, helping navigate with really useful links and things. This whole technical thing looks and sounds so great because of our tech producer Gareth Peel, and I know everyone really appreciates the fantastic job done by our closed captioner Wendy Osman. As ever, beat perfect. It's really fantastic to see. If you've missed any of the other 3 masterclasses, you fancy checking them out, you can check out our YouTube Hello Culture website and also the YouTube channel. We've had interviews with Joanna Geary, who's ex-head of Moments from Twitter, Martinique Webb from Apple, although that's only up for a certain number of days, so hurry, and Iyari Igihon from the BBC. And Asif is going to make out as like these 4 titans of media that I think has been a really great insight. Thank you to the Sign Network for funding this, and to Pip Rackstraw for all her support. That's it. Asif, anything finally from you?
No, just thank you to everyone for listening. And you know, my last piece is probably that this works, you know, it's a journey. It's just not solved, you know, and the more we acknowledge that it's about long-term sustainable change, the more difference we'll make.
Yeah, and being kind to one another along the way, because that's the thing that's going to give us the longevity, isn't it? Really is. Thanks so much to everybody. Hope to catch you sometime on a computer screen near you, or even in person. Who knows what the future of Hello Culture might bring? But for now, that's all from us. Thank you all so much. And 1 minute late. Thank you very much. Good night.